I want to thank everybody for coming again and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series. Tonight's lecture is in the Heights Community Building where we hold our classes. And a little bit about the school. Mount Gretna School of Art is a 7-week pressure cooker for painting. Students are attracted from across the country and internationally to attend each summer, and our faculty has an equally broad distribution. It changes each summer. The students are all entering their final week this week in a big push to get ready for final crits. And I'm pleased to introduce Lindsay Mueller and Paulina Swietliczko. And tonight they are our 4 Pillars artists in residence. And our 4 Pillars Artist Residency program is a little different than our intensive summer program. Really, the intent of this residency is to promote artists that are in their early to mid careers and expose them to our audience and give them a chance to do a lecture at something like this, and also pop-up shows throughout the year. And this particular event, I hope, is not only good for them to expand their reach, but also of interest to our current students who might be envisioning a way of moving back into our program as they move through their early careers. I want to thank Stinson Strout for his support of our lecture series this summer, and Purpose One. Lindsay, she's from Pennsylvania, kind of, but came up here from Washington, D.C., where she received her MFA from American University. She got her BFA in painting and psychology from Boston University. She's been in some recent shows, one called Holding Space, Holding Hands at Katzen Rotunda at the American University, Washington, D.C. And another one I thought was interesting was Tenderness Doesn't Grow on Trees, solo show at the Art Studio Gallery in Goodwin Living, Alexandria, Virginia. A travel grant from American University to attend Anderson Ranch. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Lindsay give the first talk, which will last about 20 minutes, and then we'll switch over to Paulina. And then after that, there will be a chance for Q&A. For those of you online, you'll be able to use the chat function on Zoom if you have any questions for either one or both of them.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to talk about my work. It's been really wonderful having the studio here so far. But yeah, it's been really wonderful to be here so far and just like have some more focused studio time. I know the other artists in residence gave their talk a little earlier on, but it's been nice to settle in and get to know some of you before talking about my work. So I know some of you have already seen what I've been doing in my studio a little bit because we had the open studios last week, but I included a picture here on the first slide just for those of you online or for maybe who didn't get a chance to attend. And I'm hoping that this lecture tonight kind of provides more context into things that I'm thinking about in my work, and I guess a little history of like what I've been making before being here. I wanted to start just with like some artist inspirations. My first few images of my work will be things that I made in undergrad, but I wanted to just give some context of like artists that I was familiar with at the time, and honestly like paintings I still really like and enjoy and think about. On the left is Egon Schiele's work. I just really like how everything's happening on the surface and how he's kind of like carving out space in this way. There's this circle like lasso in the center. And on the right is a painting by Edvard Munch. I'm really interested in like dark colors and how you can kind of shift space almost just through the temperature of paint, even if the colors are the same. And I just like how both of these paintings kind of, they're both really painted on the surface, but they start to create like an atmosphere. I also, when I was an undergrad, I interned and then worked briefly at the Michener Museum. It's in Pennsylvania. And they have a large collection of Pennsylvania Impressionist paintings. And I think that was one of the first times I really started to see like a lot of like Pennsylvania landscape painters. And Fern Coppage was an artist I was really interested in at the time, and how she was using light and inventive color in her work. And so like painting from life, but kind of shifting things in a way that I really found exciting. And then two more slightly contemporary references. I've just always really loved the work of Lois Dodd. I mean, this is basically a green painting that she's using different marks in, and she's like carving out space. It's all like really hot. I think it's like a hot green, but it's like the subtle shifts in temperature make the space rather than, I don't know. It's like kind of simple, but really like magical at the same time. And I really always like how wet and smushy her paintings feel. And I think that's also a similar reason why I really love the work of Claire Sherman as well. I saw a show of hers in New York when I was in undergrad, maybe like 2017 or 2018. And the way that like the marks kind of build upon each other, but she can have these dark passages that build to a light area and kind of create this like drama in a landscape space. I just find it really interesting and wonderful. And so I just wanted to mention these things as a way of framing what I was thinking about when I was painting in undergrad. I made this painting, I think in like 2018, 2019, like that winter. And I was doing a few things at the time. I think for one, I was painting from life, but I was really interested in painting from perception and observation, but how if you made yourself have really tricky parameters, how would that kind of make things inventive by force? So like for this painting and some other night paintings I did, I was dimming the lights, like kind of turning the lights really low and sometimes turning them off and like having a hall light on so that my eyes could adjust to darkness. And I felt like I could see more light outside my window. But by that same time, then you're kind of trying to like make up color temperature because it's all so close anyways. And mixing paint was complicated and challenging. And I was really interested in how like perceptual painting can feel like you're honestly trying to get something, but it's also going to come through like some subjective lens no matter what. And then how that can kind of, I guess, yeah, just like imbue more color in space. Oh, I also just was really interested in painting landscape. I mean, I think like many of you, like I grew up outside a lot. I really like painting landscape. I think that's like kind of a commonality we probably all have. And I really like loved American landscape painting, but I think a lot of times it's also really sublime and not always the best way. Like there's overabundance and it's not maybe like a practical or real view on how nature works. It's like a little overly romanticized. And I'm interested in romanticism, but I think those were kind of thoughts like swirling around my brain at this time. I was also painting a lot of snow paintings. I was really liking things that had like an ephemeral or temporal quality to them. So, I mean, I also lived in Boston at the time and snow melts and then there would snow again. So it was a really great subject. And it was also something that was temporary, but also recorded human mark in an interesting way. I did like a lot of paintings that had like footprints in them and tracks in them and how those things would disappear, but it was like a temporary marker of people being present. And formally, I guess you can see like things are kind of mushy on the surface here. These are some littler paintings I did as well. The one on the right, the one on the right is kind of funny because it's a painting I've been thinking about more lately, but I don't think I like thought about it at all in undergrad or like the last few years, but really just the fluorescent pink sign, like it being kind of like a firm indicator of somebody's presence having been there, but not really knowing any more information. Similarly with the painting on the left, this one was fire tracks that I could see from my studio window that suddenly appeared one day, which means somebody drove off a hill, which was really bad, but I don't know what happened. Like I didn't see the accident, I wasn't there, but it was kind of this like marker that lasted, that something had happened, but I didn't get to know all the details. And then it would also go away over time. And so I think a lot of these paintings started my interest in like how humans mark landscape, sometimes in subtle ways or more overt. And so I'm going to jump forward a little bit. These are paintings, I'm now jumping forward to like 2023-ish, but I'm hoping that that gave sign of like a contextual idea of like things I've always been interested in. And so like in 2023, I was still interested in like how humans mark land, landscape, nature. And I found myself becoming really interested in bark carvings. I think that's for like a few reasons. One being, I mean, they're like a marker of time. They happen, but then like a tree will grow over them. Other things start to contend with them over time. And I also think they're weird in that they're a little endearing. They're usually a marker of love or somebody's feelings about something, but they're also frustrating and damaging to trees. Like they're imposing. And so I think that they kind of like operate in an interesting space of like all the different things that they can really mean. Yeah, and so I started painting them. I also was starting to use like fluorescent colors in a more overt way, I'd say, like as this like peripheral kind of flash that's happening. And so, yeah, like I said, like really interested in like how humans like subtly mark space. And and I was really like trying to like foreground objects at this time, like making it really close to the surface. And I think you can see that in these. And this is a picture of a tree from my local park. A lot of these were kind of found or inspired by I jog and like walk through the park a lot, and also just like my daily commute. Like I live in a somewhat urban environment, and so there's a lot of trees that look like this. And sometimes I'll draw from them, or sometimes I'll like take pictures and draw at home. Some of these are then turning into paintings. Like this one's fairly direct, I'd say, and how it's becoming a painting. I think this was a pretty big painting for me this past fall, in that it was one where I was starting to use plaster on the surface of the work. This has kind of been something I've been working on over the last like year and a half, and at times not very successfully, but I feel like I'm starting to figure some things out. But I felt frustrated by like painting on the flat surfaces. I've never really liked painting on canvas. And I started to think about like how, like if you're carving into bark, you're kind of contending with a surface that's already there. It's not like blank. And so I was thinking about ways that I could make my painting have to deal with the surface of what it's on. And so that it's kind of like more of a negotiation. Like maybe at times the way the plaster is moving supports the paint. Maybe at times it kind of fights with it a little bit. And those are things I'm, still figuring out, like painting by painting. But in this one in particular, I was mimicking like other bark carvings and bark textures. As far as my plaster experiments, I figured out pretty early that it's no good when I make the plaster marks exactly like the painted marks. It gets a little like theatrical, and then it's like matchy, and it's like, oh, but does this exactly match? But more if I could capture the feeling of how something's texture feels, that seems to be, I think, getting at more what I'm interested in. And I was also thinking a lot about the edges of my work and how it sits in space. I like it when my paintings feel like they were crafted and like hand touched, like they're mimicking nature, but they're handmade. And I want them to feel like kind of like crafted organic objects. And so I started to do a lot more to the edges of the paintings as well. I'm thinking about some of the smaller ones, especially as kind of like landscape fragments. And so now I'm returning to larger work that I was making around the same time. So all of these things are kind of swirling together, but I wanted to separate them a little bit here. This is on canvas. I made this, not this past spring, but in spring 2023. I think this is like one of the last paintings I made on canvas recently. And honestly, it was because at the time I didn't really know how to make something this big on like a sculpted surface. It took me a little bit to figure out how to scale that up. I think here I was breaking a little bit more from direct representation, like using color in a more inventive way, starting to really embrace like passages of darkness and ambiguity, and how that can suggest like maybe like slightly romantic, but also potentially anxious energy in a space. And kind of, I want it to feel like maybe something's about to happen, but we're not sure what. Yeah, and really like using fluorescent greens more. Clearly, I really like fluorescent green. And then the next painting, so this is one of the first larger-ish works that I made using plaster as well to start to shift the surface. I'm mainly showing this detail because I want to show how things aren't necessarily matching up. And honestly, the plaster doesn't always support like exactly what's painted on top. At times, I think it kind of works against it, not in a bad way, but it's doing something different. Whereas other times I feel like it's helping me explore like what something feels like rather than what it looks like. Like for the rocks in particular, I feel like I really like the texture of that. And I found it's really beneficial because it's allowing me to add a richness to the work through a different vehicle of making details. Meaning like I think it can add depth and air and complexity, but it's with like an ambiguity still. It's not like I'm having to like overly paint something to make it look so exact to suggest that there's so much happening. Whereas it can more just like a different way of conveying information about a space. And so I've been really interested in that. And I'm going to steal this from Catherine's talk, but I'm going to commercial break for a second, not for commercial work, but more just to like talk about two other influences that I've had and just the people that I've been thinking about more this summer. Lucy Kim was one of my professors when I was an undergrad at BU, and she was a wonderful professor, and I really liked her work then, but I wasn't as interested in sculpture at the time. I really wish now that I learned more sculpture then. And I didn't fully get like the layering of like this like sculpted object with painting on top. And that's obviously something I've become much more interested in of late. And I just wanted to put her work here though, because I think it's something that's maybe I've been like subliminally thinking about. Like it's just really curious to me how then these things can become interconnected and related, even if the relationship isn't always overt. And I just like her work. So I feel like she's a great person to look at. And then also Hervin, I mean, I've seen his paintings for years and I've always really liked them, but I was looking through them even just a few weeks ago and I was like, oh, like, look at all of this fluorescent green. Like, I wonder where I've been getting this from in my head and how that he can really use it to create this like immediacy, even in deep space. And so just other things I've been thinking about this summer more lately. So jumping back to my work, this is a painting that I made this spring. Paper mache, and there's wood at the base, and then there's tinted plaster on top of it, and then eventually painting on it with oil paint. I'm still fairly new to using like more sculptural materials, and so some of this is like an exploratory practice for me. Like I'm still shifting what I'm doing and figuring it out, but I really thought that these were exciting paintings for me to make this spring. There's another one I'm going to show, and just learning about how to like layer information. So this is like as I'm making it. On the left, you can see it's a wood panel that I built, and then I was using pieces of wood, some paper mache, paper clay, mainly using those things because they take longer to dry than plaster, and they're a lot lighter as well, which is really helpful. Like I can barely lift this by myself, so it's helpful that it's not way heavier. And then thinking of the plaster as a kind of like unifying force, being able to tint it to kind of create that base color that you can still see. You can see it a little bit in this painting, maybe not a ton, but I think up close you can see it more peeking through. And I just wanted to show you a little bit about like the process of how I've been doing this. In this one too, I'm more directly, especially on the left, I'm putting shadows into it. Like I was looking at like shadow patterns. I'm really interested in how like shadow patterns are a part of landscape, and I think how we think about landscape, but they're not actually a physical component of it. So I've been interested in trying to like solidify this ephemeral information in the paintings in some way. And I mean, this is what I'm doing right now. And so you can see a little picture of a shadow, and that's what I was working from. Oh yeah, this is like a picture of the surface, like in the middle bottom of it, just to show how textured the surface is. And some areas have more relief too, like this is a flatter-ish part, but some have, I'd say like more dimension, like they come out an inch or two. But just to kind of show how the pink color is showing through in some ways, and how there's the marks of where the plaster was applied underneath the marks of the painting. And then this is another work that I made along at the same time as this past one, using the same process essentially, but different color palette, kind of different content. Oh, and I wanted to also add in, this is like, I'm making smaller works at the same time as this. This is another one of the smaller like tree carving works using plaster as well. And once again, like carving into the surface. This one I was using these like elongated shadow patterns in the plaster and then painting on top of it, like in some areas trying to remedy it maybe when I'm frustrated and like filling in areas with paint, and in other areas making my painting kind of contend with what's underneath and have to respond to it. One of the last things I want to note is drawing has become a bigger part of my practice in the last 2 years. I feel like it's a really great way for me to see things and digest information. Sometimes like trying out color ideas, and also how can I, like what mood does a space hold? I think it lets me ruminate over things a little bit and think about why I'm interested in a space too, because it's not always immediately apparent to me. Since being at Mount Gretna these last 2 weeks, like I've been working on a number of drawings. Some of them in the middle are kind of like shadow tracings I've been doing, and that's been a way I've been thinking about collecting shadow information for possibly future paintings. But also sometimes I'm using it just as a way to really like look at trees, branches, and things and think about how lighting's affecting them. And like I said, thinking about like what's of interest to me in those objects. Oh, and I think my final thing I'll leave you with is just something I'm currently trying to figure out in my practice, and I figured I would share. Especially the last 6 months, I've been really interested in metallic paints and how metallics can like play a role in my practice. Once again, I can't like fully explain this yet, but I think I spent a lot of time I was recently at the Natural History Museum in DC and the one in New York as well. I really always love like the gemstone exhibitions, the minerals. I think they're so interesting. And so I don't know if it's like part that, how like gold and silver and these kind of mineral type shiny things can be both natural and they're coming from nature, but then also because of their uniqueness, they also kind of connote value, like they're being prized in a special way. Like I think gold is kind of symbolic for humans. And so those are some things I'm thinking about. And so something I did like last week or so while I was here is I've been adding some gold leaf to some of my drawings. The documentation could be improved on this, of course, but I was trying to take the pictures so you can see how it's shifting in the lighting. That's something that I'm working on right now. Other than that, I'm building some sculptural surfaces with shadows. I'm, like I said, doing some shadow drawings, some other drawings, and working on a few small paintings that I'm still trying to figure out. But that's basically all. Thank you all for coming tonight and listening.
Thank you, Lindsay. Now I'd like to introduce Paulina Swietliczko, originally from Warsaw, Poland. Moved here to the US over 20 years ago, I think.
19 years.
19 years ago. Close. Now living in Roanoke, Virginia. She's a member of the Market Gallery in Roanoke. She got her MFA from the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, Poland, and has done residencies at Fresno Art Museum, Artist in Residence program in California. She's shown at Stephen Francis in Lynchburg. A couple other shows I thought sounded interesting here was a solo show, Electric Co. Art in Bedford, Virginia, and a U.S. Embassy show in Warsaw, Poland. So it was nice having your two daughters here recently and your husband for a short visit to see what their mom's been up to for this 4 weeks. But without further ado, I would like to hand it over to you, Paulina Swietliczko.
All right, hello everyone, and thank you for coming here tonight. And so first I would like to introduce myself and my background. So I graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. And after graduation, I was painting mostly the figure. And painting outside and painting the landscape is a new thing to me. Like I've been doing it for the last 3 years, which I've been around much longer than many of you. And so I would like to show you some, so this picture is of my painting while working outside of the faculty college here in Mount Gretna. And this painting is one of the first influences since I was a teenager. And this painting is at the National Museum of Art in Krakow. And the painter is Olga Boznańska, which is one of the first female Polish artists. And she studied in Krakow, and then she moved to Munich to learn how to paint. And it was at the beginning of the 20th century, the end of 19th century, when women couldn't really get art education. So she was really one of the first, along with Anna Bilinska, who was 10 years older than she was, and she was more of a realist painter. So what's funny about Olga is that she painted her portraits for a long time, and another artist was making fun that by the end, Olga finished her painting, her models would age and die, and she would keep just painting it. So like in this painting, she managed to finish before this girl grew up. But what is striking about this painting is the piercing eyes of the girl and the neutral colors surrounding her and her dress and really bright flowers that the girl is holding. So I've been always interested in portraiture, and this is a portrait of my daughter. And I try to maybe recreate the same mood. Of course, it's I didn't really think about Boznańska when I was painting this portrait. I really wanted to show the mood and the atmosphere in this painting and the nature of the person and character and the feeling of growing up and changing. And here's another painting that I was always amazed with while growing up. This is Józef Mehofer, and he was a painter, again, in 19th century. And I always thought that this painting was different because of its complicated composition and this idyllic scene where the painter painted his family. So in the right corner, we can see his little son holding a flower. It's a hollyhock. He's holding it like a magic wand, and he's wearing a necklace on his bare chest. And then we see his mother in a beautiful dress, and that she reminds me of a peacock. And then there is a nanny following them. And to the right, we see a path and the sun shining through the leaves of the apple trees. And then the whole scene is decorated with apples and flowers. And in the middle, in the upper part of the painting, we see the giant dragonfly that gives this painting a weird feeling, maybe surreal feeling, and kind of reminds me of Art Deco painting that are also very ornamental and were popular at that time. So I was always amazed by this painting, and this is my version. I didn't really think about the painting, but one of my friends, when she saw it, she said, "Oh, that looks like Mehofer, your version of Mehofer." And here I painted a portrait of my children's great-grandmother in her flower garden, and my children in the upper right corner playing butterflies or fairies. And I used the flowers in a simplified way, kind of to decorate the figure that I painted on the right side of the great-grandma in the bright red dress. And here's an example of an artist who's been always very important to me and with whom I studied at the Academy of Fine Arts, and his name is Jarosław Modzelewski. And this painting is a tribute to two other artists, Strzemiński and Malevich. And both of those artists were born, one in Kiev, Ukraine, that was Strzemiński, to ethnically Polish family. And Malevich was, I think, about 10 years older. And again, he was born to a Polish family in Russia. And both of them were pioneers of the avant-garde art. And they were one of the first artists who started abstract art in Russia and then in Poland. So here Strzemiński is painted without a leg and with gray arm. And that is because he was a lieutenant during the First World War, and he lost his leg and part of his arm and the side in his left eye, and he's covering his face with his arms. So in this painting, Modelewski is giving his tribute to those two avant-garde painters. And the composition in this painting also emphasizes that abstract way of thinking about a painting and very geometric and flat way of painting. I like how he portrayed Malevich here, who looks kind of like a figure who fell. So this is one of the painting by Modelewski, and here's another one. And again, I like how he composed this painting using 3 stripes. So we see that the painting is divided into 3 sections. On the bottom, we see 3 figures and a dog, really silhouettes. And then in the middle, we have a landscape, a simplified landscape, and then the sky above is another section of the painting. So when I think about Modelewski's painting, I always see a story. And while thinking about what I would like to paint as an artist after graduating, I wanted to use elements of design to create stories, because painting to me is a language. Like, I like to communicate my thoughts, my feelings, sometimes without even realizing that. So even when I paint a landscape, there's always some kind of story in it. And I think that the way I create composition in my painting is influenced by my professor, Modelewski, the way I divide painting into section, like right here when I use 3 figures in front and then the landscape that is simplified and painted in more abstract way behind. And here's another one. So I'm still like to flirt with portraiture. Like in this painting, this is a portrait of my daughter and my niece. And I think I wanted to show their different personalities, but also create a painting just using figures and simplifying the background and painting it in a more abstract way. And here's another painting. So whenever I am with my family, attending events with the family, I try to use the figures that I'm meeting. I don't have models to paint. So wherever I go, whatever I do, I try to find inspiration for my paintings. And here was another family event, and I took a photo and then I used it as a reference for my painting. So here my daughter is pulling her sweater over her head. And I remember, like, sometimes kids, when they play hide and seek, think that when you close your eyes, nobody's going to see you. So I titled this painting Hide and Seek. And here's the quick painting of my kids jumping on a trampoline. It was like just a very quick painting on a small piece of arches paper, which I really like to work on because of its absorbency and the texture. So I like to capture the motion and the moment when I'm painting figures. And swimming pools. When I was graduating, I had to write thesis, and I chose to write about David Hockney. And I always wanted to paint the pools, but while being in Poland, you can't really find outdoors pools because of the climate. It's much colder even than in Pennsylvania. So once I moved first to California, I had lots of swimming pools. So first I painted large figures on white background, suggesting the strong light. And then when I moved to Virginia and started going to the pool with my kids, I always found something interesting by the pool. So again, when you go to the pool, you see a lot of people, prefigure. So I started doing sketches of the swimmers and the children and taking photos and then painting it in my studio. And here's another painting based on photo references and sketches of the mother and children by the pool. So this is a large painting for me right now because now I paint smaller, 42 by 42, and paint it in the studio. And so I wanted to create a multi-figure painting, and so that it makes sense and when all those figures are together on such a large canvas. So again, I divided this composition into 3 sections where almost all the figures are in the middle and then to appear in the background. And then the part of the landscape is farther in the background as well. And recently I started painting smaller paintings, just taking my French easel and going outside. And first I started painting in my backyard. And it's a house that is behind my house and belongs to my neighbors. And whenever I looked at it, I really enjoyed looking at the sun at different times of the day and seasons and painting the yellow house. And I painted many versions of this yellow house in different time of the year. And this is the same yellow house during the snow day. So this painting was painted entirely outside in a about 2 or 3 hour session. And that's what I've been doing recently, just going outside and finding something to paint and just painting it directly. And sometimes those small paintings are becoming a part of something bigger, and sometimes not. Like this painting is 42 by 42 inches. And it's, again, the yellow house behind my house. And it started as a painting of the bushes and trees and leaves and the house, but it looked too decorative for me and I needed a story. So I painted the neighbor who likes to go outside and sit on his chair. And then it completely changed my painting because suddenly it became telling a story. So it wasn't just a painting about the trees and the house, but about the man walking by. And here's another painting of the yellow house. So during COVID, my children were staying home, learning in their rooms, in their Zoom classes, and we would take breaks and go outside. And this is a scene of my daughter playing with our dog outside. And while I was painting this picture, I was taking photos with my camera. And one day I took a photo of work in progress, like with an angle. And in my photo, all the angles were kind of crooked. And I decided that it gave more dramatic feeling to the painting. And I repainted the house and the tree. And I used those diagonals to give more dynamic composition to the painting. So I could put up a whole show of my backyard paintings, but I decided to go a little bit farther from my house and just paint the neighborhoods. So again, I was trying to find inspiration and maybe different subject matter. So while I drive around Roanoke for different things, I always see something that looks interesting to me. And in winter, I really liked the gray sky and the bare trees and the colorful houses around Roanoke. So I started painting them. And this is one of those paintings, and I called it Winter Blues. And this painting, Jesus Saves, there is a church in Roanoke with a big neon saying Jesus Saves, and everybody who lives in Roanoke knows where it is. So I found a place in the park and I painted the neighborhood from behind the trees, creating 2 different plans, like where I was standing and the neighborhood on the other side of the hill above where I was standing. And this is a large painting for a plein-air painting. It's 36 by 36, and I painted this in many sessions. And when I started, the weather was nice and the sky was blue, but by the end, the sky started changing, so I just left it. Half of the sky is cloudy and half is blue. So I'm interested in foregrounds, backgrounds, and different ways of composition. And I did this quick painting that is only 7 by 7 inches large or small, with one building closer, and then the mechanic shop and the neighborhood farther on the hill. So I like to paint downtown. I really like painting architecture, maybe because the way it reflects the light, and I like the shadows. And here's another downtown painting of shadows, lights, and I called it Blue Ford because I really like that car, and that's how the painting started. Also, when I walk around Roanoke and look at different things, it reminds me of some paintings that I remember from the art history when I was a student in Poland. Back then, I didn't know anything about the United States. And so I knew about some American painters like Andrew Wyeth, and then while walking around and looking at things, I was finding those familiar paintings that I knew from the art history, and kind of tried to maybe not recreate them, but kind of recognize like my place in it and understanding what I was saying, where I was. And here's another painting that I did in about 5 sessions. Each one was like an hour long. I really wanted to capture the setting sun. And that was a building on the way to the library that I had to go like once a week to drop off my kids. So I will drop off my kids at the library and stay for an hour and paint this building and the sun on it. And so I really enjoy painting in winter because I don't have to deal with all the greenery, with all the leaves, and I can focus on architecture, on the light and the shadows, and on the patterns. And this is one of the paintings done in winter. And another painting of winter. I really like winter landscape. I really like muted colors, the neutrals, and again, not too much green. And here is a painting, and I called it The Grandin Dog. So there is an artist in Roanoke and Glover. She's a wonderful painter, and she also creates large wooden whimsical sculptures of the dogs. So I painted her sculpture in front of the firehouse, and it kind of looks like the firehouse is like a dog house. It kind of changes the scale of everything and makes it look maybe a little surreal, with the neighborhood in the back on the hill, the fire station on the left, and the big dog in the middle. And here is Roanoke Co-op. And again, like I was wandering with my easel looking for something to paint. And I really like the shadow of the tree, kind of reflection of the tree on the sidewalk in the February afternoon light. So I'm trying to find something to paint every day. Like sometimes I have only 2 or 3 hours in the day. And this was a trip with the scouts to the skiing slope. So I decided that it's a good excuse for me to paint with white and some earth colors. And this is another 3-hour session painting before I put skis on and joined the rest of the troop.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for both of you. Lindsay, when you went to Anderson Ranch, how was that? I'm curious about how your response there and how you received things there. You're from the Northeast, you go to Colorado, you're in this very different place. Did you have to adjust how you received or what you saw or your perception? And then you go back and then, you know, spend some time and you come to Mount Gretna. So how are those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is part why I was curious to go to Colorado. That was my first time there. And it was, I mean, it was just really interesting being in a different land. I've mostly lived on the East Coast, and most of my travels have been on the East Coast, at least in more like natural environments. And so I think it allowed me to see some contrast between like just like what parks and nature and like urban nature looks like in the DC area and like kind of the East Coast in general versus out there. I also think I do have some paintings that are kind of referencing some trees and like leaves from out there, just other like interesting things that I saw. I mean, like the aspen trees are obviously beautiful, but they're also interesting because they have a really stark contrast between how little knots in them and things carved into them since they're kind of white. So I found that really interesting. But yeah, sometimes I feel like traveling, it like gives you a perspective on a new place, but then also like by contrast, the place that you're usually working in. And similar to here, like I grew up in Pennsylvania. And so I think I've now lived away from Pennsylvania for a while. So part of wanting to come back here too is to be in a more Pennsylvania environment for a little bit.
Paulina, being from Poland, leaving and coming here, how has that impacted maybe what you pay attention to or what you look for to paint? And do you ever go back to Poland and paint? And if so, you see things differently, or how is that shift in perception back in Poland?
Yeah, so when I left Poland, I first lived in California, which changed my way of seeing the light completely, because the light in California was so bright. So like first, like I was still painting the figure, but without any background, and it looked like the background was suggesting the very strong light. So I think that, yes, when I lived in California, I was painting that and focusing on that part. And when I moved to Virginia, I started painting the landscape. Maybe because it's so green and it's hard to ignore the landscape when you live in Virginia. Yeah. So I think that, yeah, it's changed my perspective completely.
You go back to Poland and if so, you paint, you go back?
I do go to Poland, but I usually don't paint. I do small sketches, but maybe because I go with my children and then I don't really have time for painting.
Well, I have a question. I was thinking about speed and painterliness, and Paulina, your 3-hour paintings come together really well. And then Lindsay has, especially with the big plaster painting, they look like fast painterly paintings, but I've seen them happen in the studio. It's not a 3-hour situation. I don't know if you could talk about painterliness and the speed of the work, and even with your drawings that you did, they seem lower, but yeah, what it means to finish a painting in one go versus having it constructed over time.
Sometimes I feel like the less painting, the better for me. I feel like if I have too much time, it's a good opportunity for me to destroy the painting. Because I like to challenge myself, and I feel like let's push it a little farther and see what happens. And what happens is that I have to start over.
I feel like I used to make paintings that were in like that one big snow painting I showed. I did that all in one day. So I think I used to make some things that were more immediate, and I really like wet on wet painting. So sometimes I feel like certain areas are like that. But I mean, the plaster has definitely slowed me down a lot. And actually, it's funny, but it's very humid here, which humidity is really slowing down my paper mache drying. So the one thing that's fine. But I'm still trying to think about, especially some of my smaller works, I can have a tendency, if I give myself too much time, to overwork them. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about plein air painting is it has like forced limitations of like, okay, like I'm gonna need to clean up soon, the sun is setting, or I'm gonna have to shift my painting. And I sometimes try to remind myself of those things in the studio so that I don't overwork things, because I'm trying to keep some level of like atmosphere. I really like having brush strokes still be visible. But yeah, definitely working on the larger scale with some of the plaster works has just like realistically slowed me down for sure. Sometimes the plastering takes much longer, and then the actual painting only takes like a day or two.
I just would like to know, well, your substrates, the plaster, and can you give us a description of, are you working on paper, wood, what's your substrate, before you put plaster on? Are you sitting there mixing plaster in plein air? And okay, so you make the substrate first.
So I'm building panels usually out of wood, and then I'm making them now like in the studio basically. So sometimes I'm drawing outside, or sometimes I'm drawing inside too. I'm using photos a lot though too to help like invent the spaces a little bit. I mean, a lot of them are based on spaces, but they're also getting more inventive, I'd say. But yeah, so I'm building panels. I'm sealing them with PVA, and then I'm making like this paper clay stuff, and sometimes just like straight up paper mache strips, and like wood gluing wood onto the surface, so like to create forms, build up the shapes, let it dry, and then I'm mixing plaster in the studio and putting that over things.
I always thought it was encaustic when I first saw it, but
And then I am like clear gessoing them so the plaster tries not to absorb too much, and then the oil goes last.
I have one final question for both of you. And I think sometimes when you're doing a Q&A, you feel like obligated to answer. So if you don't feel like you have a good answer for this, I will not judge you. I know you're going into the third week of your residency here, and I'm wondering if there's anything you've picked up or you've felt in your time here that might foreshadow where your work's headed in the coming weeks.
I can say I feel like sometimes I'm like a ruminator and it takes me time to digest things fully. So like I've been going on some like walks, and recently across from the ice cream place, there's this little path that I really like that I found. But so I've been thinking more about like deep spaces and like kind of like holes in spaces. I think that's something I'm interested in pursuing more. I don't know necessarily in the next like week or two, but I have a feeling that things I'm seeing here now and like sketching will emerge later. I guess more immediately.
I feel like I'm very intuitive painter. So I'm trying to absorb what's here and just dive in and try just to paint whatever I see, whatever is here, and then I will think about it.
I just want to finish by thanking Lindsay Mueller and Paulina Swietliczko. And thank everybody for coming tonight to our last public event lecture of the summer. Thank you.